The jungle was cloaked in gloom. The sun had dropped its final rays behind the trees, and the air wasn't peaceful, it was restless. Cracks ran across the dry ground, and the trees stood wilted and silent, testifying that the rains hadn't come in a long time. A lioness, young, cautious, and tired, wandered restlessly with her little cub, searching desperately for water. The cub's small paws dragged across the dry soil. His breathing was fast, tongue out, and his eyes carried the weight of thirst. The mother, alert and sharp, looked around constantly. Every rustle in the bushes made her ears twitch. She wasn't just seeking water, she was shielding her child from predators and danger. "Come on," she growled gently, lowering her head toward her cub. "Let's keep moving." The cub lowered his head in silent agreement and walked beside her along the path. There were signs, faded footprints, dried up flowers, and the broken hoof of a nilgai. These weren't just signs of nature. They whispered an unspoken truth. The thirst wasn't just theirs. The entire jungle was aching. Suddenly, the air changed. A faint, sharp scent floated in. The lioness lifted her nose, inhaled deeply. Water. Her heart skipped. Her pace quickened. The cub sensed it too, and hurried behind her. They pushed through a tangle of dry bushes, climbed over a small ridge, and finally, there it was, an old well. Weathered, forgotten, but still full of water. A cool breeze flowed from it, carrying the faint shimmer of life. The cub rushed ahead, stumbling to the edge and lapping the water eagerly. The lioness stood behind, watchful but relieved. But what she didn't realize was that a single moment of carelessness could cost more than she imagined. The well may have been old, but the glimmer of water inside was like a beacon of hope. The cub saw the light in his mother's eyes and grew excited. His small, dry tongue longed for relief, but innocence and urgency remained in his gaze. The lioness stepped back slightly, as if silently saying, "You first, then me." The cub leaned down at the well's edge and began to drink. Each sip was a moment of peace, but the well's rim was worn and unstable. The mother let out a low growl, a gentle warning, but it was too late. A small rock slipped beneath the cub's paw. The next moment was filled with terror. The cub's tiny body tumbled into the well with a loud splash, and then silence. The lioness lunged forward and leaned over, but she couldn't see him. The water's surface calmed again. But the storm in her heart had only just begun. She roared toward the jungle, a sound that tore through the air like lightning. It wasn't just a cry. It was a mother's scream, filled with rage, fear, and desperation. The jungle echoed her voice. But who would answer? Inside the well, the cub thrashed in the cold water. His paws beat the surface. His eyes were wide open, but there was no air. Each second drained another breath from his fragile life. Above him, there was only darkness and the distant cry of his mother. The lioness began to claw at the ground near the well. She tore at the earth with fury and helplessness, her every move saying, "Let me get to my child." Dirt flew into the air. Her claws bled, but the well did not give. Then suddenly, from deep within the jungle, something stirred. A heavy shadow moved between the trees, slow and powerful. Calm eyes watched the chaos. An elephant. His presence was vast, his strength immense, but his gaze held a quiet understanding, as if nature itself had sent someone, Not to hunt, not to run, but to help. The lioness turned toward the sound, her cry halting, her instinct caught between hope and fear. What could happen next? The jungle had gone silent again, but not because the danger had passed. It was a pause before something powerful unfolded. The lioness stood near the edge of the well, panting, her eyes frantic. She was torn between diving in blindly and clawing the earth until it gave her a way down. Her cub's cries had faded, and silence was more terrifying than noise. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps. Out from the shadows of the trees, the great elephant emerged. His skin was dark, dusty, and his large ears twitched slowly. But his eyes, they were calm, filled with an ancient kind of wisdom. The lioness growled instinctively, protective of her cub even now. But something in the elephant's slow, deliberate movements calmed her nerves. He wasn't a threat. He was something else. The elephant lifted his trunk and sniffed the air. Within seconds, he understood. He stepped slowly toward the well. His massive body loomed over the edge, and with incredible care, he lowered his trunk into the darkness below. The lioness stood still, not blinking, as the elephant gently swept the water with his trunk, searching. Then, contact. His trunk touched something soft and moving. The cub, very slowly, the elephant coiled his trunk around the small, soaked body. It took tremendous control, like wrapping silk around a flame. The cub flinched, but didn't resist, perhaps even in fear. He could feel help had arrived. With one powerful yet precise motion, the elephant began to lift. The lioness held her breath, and then the cub emerged, soaked, trembling, covered in mud, but alive. The elephant laid the cub carefully beside the lioness and stepped back. The mother rushed forward, nuzzling and licking her cub furiously, checking every inch of him. The cub whimpered softly, responding to her warmth. The jungle still held its breath, as if witnessing something sacred. The lioness looked up at the elephant. Her eyes, wild with grief just moments ago, now held something deeper, gratitude. A kind of bond had been forged. No words, no sounds, just silent understanding between two powerful beings. A mother and a protector. The elephant turned, slow and steady, and disappeared into the trees. But the story was not over yet. The well side was quiet again, but this time it was a calm after rescue. The lioness sat curled around her cub, shielding him with her body. He was still trembling, soaked to the bone, but breathing. Alive. The elephant stood nearby, still and observant, his trunk hanging low like a silent guardian. Then, the silence broke. A low mechanical rumble echoed through the trees. Grr. The lioness looked up, the elephant's ears twitched. From between the bushes, a white jeep emerged, a red emergency light spinning on top. It halted several meters away, and three figures stepped out, all in green forest ranger uniforms. They carried tranquilizer rifles, a yellow medical kit, and a satellite radio. One of them, older, broader, with lines of experience carved into his face, observed the scene. His name tag read, Dr. Mark. He raised his hand to stop the others. For a moment, he just stared. A lioness protecting her rescued cub. An elephant beside them like a silent hero. This is beyond remarkable, Dr. Mark whispered. They look calm, said one of the rangers, adjusting his camera and beginning to record. No signs of aggression. It's like they know the lioness didn't snarl. She didn't run. She simply shielded her cub. Her golden eyes watched the humans with quiet warning. I'm not your enemy, but I'm not helpless either. The elephant stepped back, sensing his time had passed. With a final glance, he turned slowly and began to walk into the jungle, each step steady and solemn, as if retreating into legend. One ranger raised his walkie-talkie. Base camp, this is Field Team Alpha. We've found the lioness and cub, both alive. Situation stable. Elephant assisted in rescue. Repeat, elephant assisted in rescue. There was a pause on the other end. Then a stunned voice replied, unbelievable. Sending medical and drone team now. Dr. Mark stepped closer, crouching a safe distance away. We're not here to harm you, he murmured, mostly to himself. We're here to understand, and for the first time and perhaps forever, the wild, the wounded, and the humans stood in the same place. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something else, something possible. The atmosphere around the well was heavy, but the tension had shifted. The lioness lay next to her cub, still trembling, but her eyes were no longer frantic. The elephant had gone, his part in the rescue complete. The cub, though weak, had life in him again. The steady rise and fall of his chest was all the proof anyone needed. Then, the quiet was shattered once more by the sound of another vehicle. A second jeep, white as the first, rolled in from the jungle. This time, it carried a medical team. Two wildlife doctors, along with a tranquilizer specialist, jumped out, carrying a large first aid box, oxygen masks, and a few monitoring tools. One of the doctors, a woman with a calm but firm demeanor, signaled for the rangers to keep their distance. Dr. Mark moved towards the lioness, his eyes meeting hers, trying to gauge her behavior. We'll need a few minutes, Dr. Mark said in a low voice. If she gets agitated, we'll have to tranquilize her for safety. The other ranger nodded and prepared the tranquilizer rifle, but it was clear that they were all hoping it wouldn't come to that. The doctors advanced carefully. Dr. Mark approached the cub, checking him with the gentlest of touches. He didn't flinch or growl. The cub was too exhausted to do anything but lie there, his eyes half-lidded, but still watching the humans. The doctor's hands went to the cub's chest, gently pressing, checking for broken ribs. The cub's breathing was shallow, but steady. Light dehydration, the doctor reported, but no fractures. His lungs are a bit affected by the water, but nothing too serious. He needs immediate care. The lioness growled quietly, her eyes narrowing as she watched them, but she didn't move. She only inched closer to her cub, her protective instincts strong as ever. We need to get him out of here soon, one of the rangers suggested, his voice concerned. We can't leave him here tonight. If he stays, predators might be drawn in, and infection could set in. Dr. Mark nodded. The decision now is whether we move them both to a safer place. It's a risk for the lioness, but it's better than the alternatives. The second ranger raised his walkie-talkie, giving a report to base camp. Both mother and cub found safe. Moving them to a rehab facility for medical treatment. Need to tranquilize the mother for transport. There was a long pause, then a voice came back through the radio. Affirmative. Tranquilize her gently. Move them to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center immediately. The lioness, feeling the weight of the moment, stared at Dr. Mark one last time. The Rangers were ready to make their move. The tranquilizer dart was loaded. Dr. Mark looked back at the lioness, his eyes soft with understanding. Then he gave the order. The dart went in. The lioness collapsed gently to the ground. Her body relaxed, but her instinct to protect her cub never wavered. The lioness, though sedated, was carefully loaded into a specially designed enclosure that would provide her with a safe and quiet space. It was equipped with natural elements, grass, trees, and a small pool to simulate her natural habitat as closely as possible. Her cub, still weak but stable, was placed nearby. The staff worked efficiently, preparing the area while maintaining a respectful distance. The center's medical team immediately began their work. Dr. Mark, along with the wildlife doctors, performed a thorough medical checkup on the cub. His lungs were still recovering from the water intake, and there was mild dehydration. But overall, the prognosis was positive. A careful drip of fluids was administered, along with some antibiotics, to ensure no infections would take root. The cub winced slightly, his small body still too frail to withstand much handling, but his eyes sparkled with a glimmer of life. He was alert, even if not fully recovered, and that was all the doctors needed to see. His body was slowly beginning to fight back. Meanwhile, the lioness was regaining consciousness. She woke slowly, disoriented, but the first thing she did was look around, searching for her cub. Her instincts were unshakable. When she saw him, nestled under a blanket of straw and being attended to by the medical team, her gaze softened. She took a few tentative steps towards him, her body still groggy from the tranquilizer, but her eyes full of concern. Dr. Mark watched from a distance, making notes in his observation book. He saw the bond between the two was unbroken, even in this unfamiliar place. She showing strong maternal instincts, he murmured to his colleague. No aggression post-sedation. It's a good sign. The team worked methodically, ensuring that the lioness and her cub had what they needed. The cub's treatment was continued throughout the night, with minimal human interaction to avoid stressing the lioness. That night, as the center's lights flickered softly in the distance, the cub curled up beside his mother. For the first time since the rescue, the lioness exhaled a deep, relieved breath. Her cub was safe. She could sleep, knowing that they were in a place where their journey of healing had only just begun. The days passed quietly at the rehabilitation center. The lioness and her cub were carefully monitored, both showing signs of gradual recovery. The medical team worked diligently, with Dr. Mark leading the effort to track the cub's health. His condition was improving steadily, though still fragile. The fluid levels in his body were now normal, and the antibiotics had cleared up any lingering infections. The center's staff, including trained wildlife caregivers, ensured that both mother and cub had all they needed. The lioness, while still cautious, began to show her natural instincts again, carefully watching over her cub and pacing around their enclosure. She would sometimes stretch her limbs, testing the strength in her muscles, while the cub's energy slowly returned. By the end of the second week, the cub was able to move around with more ease. He began to play with small sticks and leaves that had been placed in the enclosure to stimulate his instincts. It wasn't much, but it was progress. His playful swipes at the branches were tentative at first, but soon he was pouncing with more enthusiasm, gaining strength with each passing day. Dr. Mark and his team observed closely, taking notes on the cub's behavior. They were impressed by his quick recovery, though they remained cautious. The rehabilitation center wasn't just a place for medical treatment. It was also a place for learning and adapting. It was important that the cub relearn the ways of the wild, even if he wouldn't return to the jungle just yet. "We'll start with some basic behavior training," Dr. Mark said during a staff meeting. "The cub is recovering physically, but emotionally, we need to help him adjust to a more natural lifestyle. We'll simulate hunting and foraging behaviors, starting with simple tasks." The lioness, now stronger and more alert, kept a watchful eye on every move her cub made. Her maternal instincts were as sharp as ever. But it wasn't just the cub's recovery that mattered, the bond between them was just as important. The time they spent together in the enclosure allowed them to reconnect, to heal from the trauma they had experienced. As the sun set each day, the cub and lioness would rest together, a quiet sense of peace settling over them. They were safe now. But the journey ahead would require patience and dedication, both from them and from the humans who cared for them. As the days turned into weeks, the rehabilitation center slowly transformed into a place of learning. Dr. Mark and his team focused not just on the cub's physical recovery, but on his instinctual growth. The cub, though still young, had an incredible capacity for learning, and his curiosity about the world around him grew with each passing day. "We need to start simulating more natural behaviors for the cub," Dr. Mark explained one morning. "Hunting and foraging are essential skills he'll need in the wild, even if we're not releasing him just yet. His instincts are waking up, and we need to nurture that." In the enclosure, the team set up a variety of activities designed to mimic the wild environment. Small, hidden food sources were placed around the area to encourage the cub to hunt. The cub's keen sense of smell quickly came into play. He would sniff the air, his body tense, as he followed the trail of hidden meat. At first, his movements were clumsy, but with time, he began to pick up speed. The lioness, ever watchful, observed her cub's progress closely, though she couldn't help but feel a pang of worry every time he stumbled. She knew that these experiences were necessary. This was his path to survival. It wasn't just about physical recovery anymore. It was about reclaiming his place in the wild. Over time, the cub became more confident in his ability to find food. Dr. Mark noted that his reactions were becoming sharper, more instinctive. He would crouch low, observing the ground carefully before pouncing, just as any wild cub would. His muscles were becoming stronger, and his body was once again in sync with the natural world. As the weeks went by, the cub's behavior became more assertive. He began to explore the enclosure more boldly, testing his strength and agility. The team also began to introduce new challenges, climbing structures to simulate trees, as well as new scents and sounds to mimic the natural habitat. They could see the wildness returning to him. Bit by bit, the lioness too began to act more like her wild self. She was no longer just a mother trying to protect her cub. She had begun to reclaim her role as a hunter and protector. The bond between them was evident, and the rehab team marveled at how nature was gradually taking its course. "We're getting closer," Dr. Mark said one evening as he watched the cub hunt, his eyes sharp and focused. "It won't be long now before we'll have to make the decision to release him. We just need to be sure he's ready." For the first time since they arrived, the cub seemed ready to face the challenges of the wild. But the final test was yet to come. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the rehabilitation center. The air was thick with anticipation as Dr. Mark and his team gathered around, watching the cub from a distance. The lioness, now fully alert and strong, paced around the enclosure. She had regained her strength and was almost a mirror image of her wild self. "We've come a long way," Dr. Mark said, his voice thoughtful. "The cub is strong, his instincts are sharp, and he's adapting to the environment in ways I hadn't imagined possible when they first arrived." But despite the obvious progress, there was one final hurdle they had to clear before they could make the decision to release him. "Tomorrow," Dr. Mark continued, "we'll do one final test. We need to see if the cub can survive on his own, even for a short while, without direct intervention from us." The team spent the evening preparing for the test. They set up hidden food sources, mimicking the conditions of the wild. The cub and his mother would be released into a section of the enclosure that simulated a wilderness scenario. No food would be provided directly to them, and they'd have to rely on their hunting skills and instincts to survive for a period of time. As the sun rose the next morning, the test began. The gate to the section of the enclosure was opened, and the lioness immediately led her cub into the area. He followed closely behind, his body tense with anticipation. The team watched quietly, a mix of excitement and concern filling the air. The cub sniffed the ground, his eyes darting around as he searched for any sign of food. At first, he appeared uncertain, unsure of where to start. But then, as though something clicked, he crouched low to the ground, following a faint scent trail. Dr. Mark leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the cub. The young lion moved with purpose, his instincts guiding him as he navigated the unfamiliar terrain. Within an hour, he successfully tracked down a hidden food source, and his joy was palpable. The team exchanged glances, their faces a mix of pride and relief. By the end of the day, the cub had proven himself. He had hunted, navigated his environment, and most importantly, survived without human help. "That's it," Dr. Mark said softly, a smile crossing his face. "He's ready." The cub and his mother would be released back into the wild. The rehabilitation center's mission was complete. The bond between mother and cub had been restored, and they would now face the challenges of the wild together, free once more. The morning air was fresh with the scent of the forest, filled with the promise of new beginnings. The team stood in silence, watching as the lioness and her cub, now fully recovered, stood at the edge of the rehabilitation center's gates. They had spent weeks here, growing stronger, and now the time had come to return to the wild, where they truly belonged. Dr. Mark stood at the front, his heart heavy yet hopeful. He had seen the cub evolve from a frail, frightened creature to a strong, independent young lion, ready to face the world. The lioness, too, was a sight of strength and determination. The bond between them was undeniable, a mother's fierce love guiding her cub, and a cub learning the ways of the wild under her watchful eye. "It's time," Dr. Mark said softly, turning to his team. "They're ready." With a signal from Dr. Mark, the gates slowly opened, and the lioness stepped forward, her movements graceful and confident. The cub hesitated for a moment, looking back at the people who had cared for him, but then his mother's presence urged him forward. He followed her into the wild, each step a silent promise that he would face the future with the same courage his mother had taught him. The team watched in awe, their hearts swelling with a mixture of pride and bittersweet emotion. This was the moment they had all worked toward, the moment when human intervention had given way to nature's call. The cub was no longer under their care. He was now part of the wilderness, free to live as nature intended. For a while, the lioness and her cub simply stood at the edge of the forest, looking around at the vast expanse before them. The sounds of the jungle filled the air, from the distant call of birds to the rustling of leaves as the wind passed through. It was a world full of both danger and beauty, a world that was theirs once again. Finally, the lioness moved deeper into the forest, the cub trailing closely behind her. Together, they disappeared into the trees, their silhouettes vanishing as they became one with the wild. As the team turned to leave, Dr. Mark paused for a moment, watching the spot where they had disappeared. A small smile tugged at his lips. Their home, he whispered, and with that, the journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty ended in freedom. The lioness and her cub had returned to the wild, where they belonged, stronger than ever and ready to face the challenges ahead.